Jim, Marie's on mute, so you start out.
Marie, why don't you start out? Do you want to start out?
No, I really do
Just
want you
tell
to
what
start. And I'll
you want me to.
yeah.
You want me
You
to start?
yeah, you start, Jim, and maybe I'll add something if you spur on a memory. Maybe we kind of go back and forth on a memory of a
Okay.
certain thing. I don't know.
Okay.
We'll wing
Okay.
it.
I will start out. Are you ready?
We're ready.
Okay. Marie and I had a chance to go to Madagascar and also to Kenya. Doug and Audrey were in Madagascar, and Kim and Marcy were in Kenya on their mission. And I don't know where you could go anywhere in the world that would have been as exotic, as interesting, as rewarding. It just was an incredible trip. And they were such good hosts. We did not have to worry about where we were going to stay, what we were going to eat, what we were going to do, where we were going to go. They took care of everything, and it was just incredible. The things that we saw and experienced, it was just amazing. And I'll start out by saying we left from Salt Lake and flew to Atlanta. From there, I remember we went to France, Paris, but before we got there, we could see into Scotland and England. And then when we landed and changed planes in France, Paris, and we went south across the Mediterranean Sea and then across the Sahara Desert. I remember the waves on the Mediterranean Sea. And then when we went over the Sahara Desert, or just sand. And then at night we went over I assume it was the Congo, but you could look down and see fires burning all down below. And then we got to Madagascar, to the capital of the airport in Antananarivo, and we spent the night there. And then that's the capital city. I don't know how big it is, but I don't know if they know. I don't think they know how big it is, but it's big. Doug probably has an idea. But one thing that I noticed is in that city, there's ox carts driving around all down the streets, plus cars. But most people don't have cars, so it wasn't really a lot of traffic like it would be in U.S. cities. And then we spent the night there, and then the next day we went up to Doug's home, which was in Ansara Bay, and that's where he was working on a dairy for the president of the country. And they had a real modern dairy, and they had fields and grew their own crops. And that was the only fields that I saw in the whole country, and that was the only place that I saw krill. There was a lot of cattle, but people would have 2 or 3 or 4, 5, but I never saw a krill in the country of Madagascar. They would have them tied up by their neck or their horns, and then in the daytime they just herd them around all along the road or off out in the bush somewhere, and where there weren't fields. Maybe sometimes they were even in the fields where they weren't supposed to be, and it was usually an older woman or some kids that would be herding the cows. But Doug had been here before and showed us pictures, and it doesn't do justice to what it's really like when you're there in person and seeing what you see. And Doug and Audrey just took us all over. We just saw incredible stuff. And I'm just going to give you a few highlights of some of the things that we saw. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating was to watch them plant rice. And it was only women that planted rice. And if they had babies or little kids, they had them out on the side. And they might have to stop and go nurse them once in a while, but they'd have a row of women. And I think that they had plants. And I think what they do is just throw some rice out on wet place with water in it, and the rice grew, because you'd see just little patches of really green, and then they pull them up, and then they have a pile of them, and each woman would be out there with a bunch of those rice plants and sticking them in the ground. And they would have a row of women, and they would be going backwards, planting that rice in the water. They would stick it down through the water and into the mud, and that's how they planted rice. I never saw a man ever plant rice. Once in a while, when they were getting the fields ready, they might be out there with a couple of oxen with a kind of it was supposed to be a plow, but all it was a stick that dragged around into the dirt and the mud, because it was covered with water. But these rice paddies, they would start clear up on the hill, and there'd be water that would go into the rice paddies, and then what would run off there would come down and go into another rice paddy, and they had terraces clear down the hill, clear to the river. And it was just green and really pretty. So that was really interesting. And some of the things that we did there, Doug had the farm where he lived was really nice, a modern dairy, and his cows were just like a dairy here, but the native cattle they were nothing like that. But the people was what I thought was so fascinating, just to watch the people. And the people in Madagascar, they remind me of people from Philippines. Now, once in a while, you saw somebody a little darker than that had a little more African blood in them, and as you went along the coast, they showed more dark. But Doug showed us quite a few things. Doug and Audrey. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is for concrete, they had the old people and the kids would use hammers and break up rock to put in their concrete. And then we went to a member of the church, and he was out on the river, and this was about 12 miles away, and he was in a boat, and he would go out in the boat, throw his anchor down, and then he would take a bucket and dive down into the river and get sand and bring out and put in his boat. When he got it filled, then he'd bring over to the side of the river and dump it out. And then somebody would come along later and take that sand, and they'd use it for concrete. And this was a member of the church, and his wife had arranged to get the Christmas tree for the Christmas party in the branch. And so we went out with Doug to get the Christmas tree, and she took us out on kind of a hill, and she cut the Christmas tree with a meat cleaver. She had her kids with her, and then we got the Christmas tree in the Doug's truck, and her and I know one daughter. I can't remember how many kids were with us, but the one daughter, as we drove back into the kind of where the people were living, she wanted her friends to see her so bad that she was riding in a vehicle. She'd probably never been in a vehicle in her life, but it was sure interesting. And this family, they would walk to church, and they would walk barefoot and carry their thongs or flip-flops, and then when they got to church, then they'd put them on. But they would walk that 12 miles barefoot every Sunday. We just saw so many interesting things. The people there were really poor. They just didn't hardly have anything. I thought the houses looked pretty good. They'd make their own bricks and build their own houses, and they look quite nice. I'd like to have gone in them and see what they look like inside, but they look quite nice from the outside. They didn't have windows in them. They'd have wooden shutters that they would close. and one thing that Doug did is he took us to a livestock auction, and all it was a big field. They didn't have any corrals or pens, and people would just bring their livestock in, and then they'd have an auctioneer, and we didn't stay for when they sold them, but we saw them where they'd have them gathered, and he had an interpreter there, and we talked to one guy, and he brought 12 or 13 oxen in, and he said that they were all broke to work. You could drive them and work them, or you could buy them for meat. And they just had them in a little group there. And I think it had taken him a couple of days to get there from wherever he brought them from. But that was just really interesting to see that auction, how they just out there in the field in no pens. One thing that was really interesting is when Hedge would go through the town, the little kids would come up and he'd give them candy, so they all knew him, and so they would come in. He was just like the Pied Piper, and he'd take their picture and then show it to them, and they would just giggle. They just laugh, and they were, these little kids were just so entertained, and they were so cute, and he would get them to line up and and sing songs and do plays and stuff. It was really interesting. Most of the people there were really poor and didn't have vehicles. Most of them would walk wherever they went. Once in a while you'd see a bicycle, but I remember one time I saw a woman, and there was kind of a main road that went through the length of the country, and then they would just walk off, go up a hill to wherever their houses were, wherever they had to go. And this woman was carrying, it looked like about 300 pounds of bricks on her head, stacked on her head, and she slipped and fell. But she caught herself with her hand before she went right down flat, and she did not lose that load of bricks that was on her head. I just thought that was amazing that she could do that. But we saw, just if you wanted to be entertained, all you'd have to do is go out on the highway and watch people go by. One time we were out there on the highway, and a woman was bringing a duck, mother duck, and all the little ducks. And Marie wanted to get a picture of her, and so she went out to get a picture, and the ducks went out in the water and started swimming away, and he had kind of a hard time getting them back on the road, going down the road. But it was sure interesting.
I felt bad. I felt bad about that.
You want me to keep going, Chubber, or do you want to say something?
You're doing great.
Go ahead and say something.
I remember the ducks too. I was going to mention that. I was just going to say I remember that picture, and I'd forgotten that I scared all the ducks away. But I felt kind of bad, but it was just the perfect picturesque moment, and she finally herded them all back on, didn't she? For me to get a good picture.
She got them back on the road, but it was not easy.
No, yeah, I heard she had that long stick to try and get them on there, just like that children's book. Can't remember the name of it. Yeah. No, you're doing good. You keep going. You're reminding me of some things that I'll mention after you're done.
Okay, I'll just keep going then until you stop me. But you stop me anytime, and you can have the whole floor.
I don't want the whole floor, but
okay.
I might. I'll just add a few things if I think of it.
Okay, so while we were there, then Doug and Audrey were going to take us down to a resort town along the coast, along the next to the Indian Ocean. So his driver drove us. He had his own chauffeur that would drive us wherever we needed, and he would tell the chauffeur wherever to pick us up, what day, and he would be there. And that's all he had to do, was just drive that vehicle, and pick us up when we needed to be picked up. But we went to the Capitol, and we stayed the night. The next morning, we got up really early. You opened the window, and you could hear roosters crowing all over that capital city, every direction. But anyway, we went to the airport. We got on an airplane, and it taxied out and stopped. And then they stopped for a minute, and then pretty soon some mechanics got in it and checked it, and they couldn't fix it. And so they got out. Finally, they took us back into the airport. We waited a while, and they weren't able to get the plane fixed, I guess. So they finally brought out another plane, and we got on it and flew down to the coast. It was a resort town, and we spent a day or two there, and we went swimming in the Indian Ocean. We rode horses on the beach, and we had a lot of fun there. Marie and I went out in the Indian Ocean. We got a guide, and he took his little dugout canoe with pontoons on it. Those outriggers. We went out and we went snorkeling, and the coral was just beautiful, and there was every color of fish below us that you could see. Now, there was a reef out farther, so this water was still, and you could just see everything, and it was amazing. And then we came back and went a little farther down to where the ocean had come in, because there wasn't a reef, and the waves had come in, and we body surfed and played in the ocean and on those waves. And it was cloudy, so I thought I'd be fine. I wouldn't get sunburned, but I did get sunburned, even though it was cloudy, and we could not find any suntan lotion or medicine in the whole country, because everybody there was dark enough they didn't get sunburned. But that night I had to sleep in the bathtub of cold water all night, and I still peeled and peeled again, and I peeled again about 3 different times. But the next day I was just sick from being so sunburned. But while we were there at that resort, Chubber was she'd met the biggest rock star in the whole country, and he was really interested in her, and so they were out quite late in the night, or it was kind of worried about her, but she came back and everything was fine, and she got his tape of his recording. It was just like if she had been dating Elvis Presley in this country. So she was hot stuff out over there.
Let me share a little bit of that experience, Jim.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't realize you knew that I left because you were in so much pain that I didn't think you were cognizant of where I was or what I was doing. So I think also, I think you were getting shoots of pain in your nerves up your legs too. Like you just get like sharp shoots of pain. I think it could have been from something you touched, one of the coral or something you touched.
I think so.
Or something. But
yeah, I think so.
I met 3 guys at the hotel swimming pool, and they were native Malagasi's, native from Madagascar, and they just started talking, and I was talking, and just friendly and la 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 la, just excited to meet people my age. And so they said, well, let's go dancing. And there was some music, a disco there at the bottom floor of the hotel. So I thought, oh yeah, that's fun, let's go, yay, la 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 la. And we were just dancing and boogieing. And then they said, well, we want to go take you to meet our family. And I was like, yeah, let's go. Go meet your family. And I was so naive. They're here, like 3 guys, and we just hopped in their van and started driving away. No one knew where I was. No one knew where I was going. But I was like, oh, yay, this is just so fun. And I was getting them to talk all about themselves. I was sharing everything about me. And it turns out, like Jim says, one of the guys had just won the equivalent of American Idol, but for Madagascar. So he had just done a recording and he had a poster of himself and all this stuff. And I didn't even, they could have taken me somewhere and beat me up and attacked me, and I was just clueless, but they seemed like good kids. So anyway, they took me to their mom's house, one of the singer's house, and we went inside and I ate dinner with them, and then we hopped back in their van and they took me back to the hotel, and that could have been way worse situation. But there was a bunch of nice
and I
kids.
think probably Jason was praying for you, so that's why you were safe.
That, and someone else must have been praying too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lucky situation. But go ahead.
English?
Okay, and when we were at that resort,
Not very good, Tim, but they did speak broken English enough that we could communicate. Sorry, Jim,
well,
go ahead.
I noticed that most of the people in Madagascar didn't know English very good. Now the little kids, like these kids that Hedge would, all these little kids that would come around him, and they would say things like, "I am fine. How are you?" That they'd learned in school. They were just teaching them English, and they knew a few phrases, and they'd say them, and they were so cute. But from that resort, we were there for a couple of days and saw and did a lot of things, and then the day that the chauffeur was supposed to pick us up, and then took us to this place. It was kind of a resort. We spent the night, and this was kind of in the mountains, and it was kind of jungle and real pretty. And we went to a lemur park, and these lemurs were on this island so that they could keep them from running off, and they give us a canoe, and we canoe around the island. And some of the lemurs, there were all different kinds of lemurs. Some of them would be in the trees, and some of them were pretty wild, but some of them would come up to you, and you could feed them bananas or pet them or whatever you wanted. So that was really amazing. And then we went on home, but and while we were there, we went to church, and the branch president asked me to speak, and he asked Marie to sing, and it was really, really interesting. There was a lot of people to church, and they had baptisms afterwards, and it was really, really awesome. Another thing that we did while we were there is we went to this place where they were selling all kinds of rocks and gems and things, and every kind of ruby and sapphire and stones of all kinds. I think if you knew what you're doing, you could have bought some there and got a really good deal on them and made money on them. But I didn't know anything about them, but I did buy a blue rock that you can see through it, and really, really pretty. It's a pretty good sized rock, about the size of a baseball. But they just had tables of different rocks and petrified wood, and all kinds of stuff. That was another thing we saw. But it was just every minute we were there that it was exciting and something incredible to see and do and experience. And then we got on an airplane and went to Nairobi, Kenya. And we flew into Nairobi, and Kim and Marcy picked us up at the airport.
Hey, Jim.
And
Jim?
we,
Jim,
yes.
do you care if I share a few things about Madagascar before you?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. You betcha.
I told Jim and Louise that I couldn't remember anything about this trip. Every child that I've birthed, they've killed a few memory cells, brain cells. So I couldn't remember anything, but every time Jim says something, my memory is coming back. So I've been writing some notes here. I was about the rice paddies. I was here, take him out. I was so impressed with these red clay hills, and they would put these amazing terraces in them to do the rice paddies. And I thought that was so amazing that they could utilize so many aspects of the land by being industrious and putting those cool terraces on. The oxen that Jim was talking about in that market we went to, or auction, he didn't say the condition of the oxen, how we very underfed. You could see their rib cages just really in poor condition in our standards. I was just so surprised to see that, but yet how they seem to get the job done. They were still pulling the cart even though they were leaning on each other to stand upright. And the other thing that I remembered was the people were so industrious. One of my favorite foods there was the corn on the side of the road that the men would char corn on the cob and then come and sell it to you in your vehicle. And I've tried to recreate that since then, and it's never tasted quite as good as it did in Madagascar, but that was one of my favorite things. And that gem market that we went to, Audrey had told me to bring some American clothes to trade and barter with to get some more of those gems. So it was girls that were selling them, and so I was able to trade them some secondhand clothes for the gems that were really, really pretty. I still have them, and I've been meaning to put them in a setting or a necklace. I have yet to do that, but anyways, those were the things that I remembered, Jim. So go ahead. You're doing awesome.
Oh. Okay. And you stop me any time you want to say something.
Well, I'm listening to you and remembering stuff. So yeah, you're doing great.
Okay. So we flew from the capital. We got on a plane and flew over to see Kim and Marcy, and they were doing missionary work in Kitale, and they had got permission from their mission president to meet us and spend some time with us because they'd been really, really busy, and they'd had some really difficult situations. They'd had some excommunications and things, and the mission president told them to take some time and spend with us. And so they were really, really good about that. And from Nairobi, we stayed with some older missionary couples, and then we left Nairobi, and we were going to go to a park where a game reserve, and the name of it was Tsavo Park. And on the way, just off of the road, I see a corral full of cattle and sheep and stuff. I said, "Hey, I want to stop here." So we stopped and drove into where it was, and they had these big thorn bushes for a corral with big long thorns, and they could keep the cattle and the sheep in, but the goats were on the outside. And those people, we talked to them a little bit. There were a few people there, and a handful of people, and we talked to them a little bit. Now, most of the people in Madagascar didn't know very good English, but a lot of them in Kenya knew some English because it was settled by the English. The English was there and up until the point when they got run out, and they had done a lot of work on roads and building houses and stuff, and a lot of the people knew English. But in Madagascar, it was colonized by the French, and all they were doing was trying to get all what they could out of it, and so that people there didn't know English very much. But when then from there, from looking at their livestock, then we drove to this park, and we drove around. You'd see all kinds of animals, but when we saw elephants, and I think of all the elephants in Africa, of all the animals in Africa, I thought that the elephants were the most fascinating to watch. They were just really, really amazing to watch them and how they interacted and what they did. If you got close to them in a vehicle, they would always get their babies on the other side. The grown-ups would be between you and them. But we got pretty close to them in Herman's truck, and they'd get a little bit excited. And I had some binoculars, and you could look through those binoculars at those elephants, and they'd kind of take a step toward you and throw up their ears, and you'd take one step, and they'd be on top of you looking at them through those binoculars. They look so close. But we watched them a lot, and we saw a lot of animals, a lot of different kinds of gazelles and stuff like that. But when we were there, we saw rhinos, and we saw white rhinos and babies, and we saw hippos, a lot of hippopotamuses, and we saw lions and giraffes and zebras and wildebeest and Cape buffalo and every kind of gazelles and stuff. I don't even know what the names of them were, that were like antelope and stuff. They were all over. And then there's these places where you could stay at, and they'd have lit up, and at night you could watch the animals come into the water holes. We didn't see a lot, but the food there was really good. It was just like a buffet, and then you could get anything you wanted to drink. You could have all the passion fruit or pineapple or orange juice you wanted, and the food was really good. And then they had cabins that you could stay in. That was just really fun to be in those game parks and drive through them and see all the animals. And one thing that I thought was very interesting is you'd see warthogs, and those warthogs would be running around these big packs of I can't even think of the name of them. They're hyenas, and they were not afraid of them. They just were not afraid of them. And then we saw jackals and everything, and those warthogs just run around. They weren't scared of anything. Now maybe they were if they had little ones, but so we saw just every kind of animal. It was just fascinating. And then we were going to go from that park to the Amboseli Park, but you couldn't drive through, only in a convoy, and we missed the convoy. And the reason for that is they didn't dare let you go through because of the Maasai tribes that were living in those areas, and they had stopped some of the people and killed them driving through their lands, and it was not safe. And we saw quite a few of the Maasai people and tribes, and saw them out herding their cattle, and little kids out herding them, and then you'd see some of the grown-ups, men wearing their Maasai blankets, and one thing that I thought was really fascinating was to go through some of those Maasai villages and just see the people. It was amazing. If the girls were if they were really had all their makeup and makeup on and everything dressed up, why they would have kind of a white goop. I think it was milk and cow manure and I don't know what all that they'd have it in their hair. But their earrings is amazing. They cut a hole in their ear and then stretch it out and then put the earrings in it, and they have all kinds of fancy earrings and dresses. One of the things that I noticed in Kenya is that the women wore really, really pretty dresses. I noticed that when we were first flying into the country, before we landed in Nairobi, we were flying over some fields, and the first thing that I saw was women out there in bright colored dresses out there in their fields grubbing weeds, weeding their corn and squash and different stuff. And while we were there, we had to go around this because we couldn't go through because we missed the last caravan that went through, so we had to go clear around to go to the Amboseli Park, and we just saw a lot of stuff there too, all kinds of wild game animals. And one thing that we saw was the biggest spring in the world, just a river that just come right out of the ground, and they're just running a river right out of the ground. And there was a whole bunch of hippos there, and all around there would be crocodiles, but those hippos would keep their babies in the middle so the crocodiles wouldn't get them. And then there's all kinds of monkeys and baboons and all stuff. One time we were stopped and Marcy was eating a banana, and a monkey come up and reached in the window and stole her banana and took off. She didn't even see it or wasn't even expecting it, and she stole her banana. But we just saw all kinds of animals, zebras and giraffes and ostriches and unbelievable amounts of animals. But the elephants, I just thought they were really fun to watch them. Okay, and then we did go to another park, and that was the Nakuru, and there was kind of a lake there, and there was a big Cape buffalo laying out in the water, I guess, to keep cool. But there were thousands of flamingos, and they were just pink along the edge of that. That was really amazing, and they had all kinds of animals there. But one thing that when we would be driving, some of the time would be driving on the road, and sometimes the road was so rough that we would just be driving in the borrow pit. And the borrow pit was smoother than the road. Since the English had left, nothing had been done, no road work had been done on the roads. And we went to the eastern part of the country, clear across it, and we went into Tanzania, and we were right at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro. From a long distance, sometimes you couldn't see the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet, but Kilimanjaro is over 19,000 feet, but it starts out at sea level. And Everest, I don't know how high it is, probably about 10,000 where it starts. So Kilimanjaro would take you 2 or 3 days to climb it. But Marie and we went up it a ways, and you could just see the vegetation changing as you went higher. There was desert all around it, and then as you got higher, then you got where there were green trees, and then some of the people were raising corn, and it just got more lush and more moisture the higher up you went. But a lot of times, from the distance, you could see the top of Kilimanjaro and the bottom, and there'd be clouds through the middle of it. And sometimes you couldn't see the top, it just depended on the clouds. But that was really amazing that we got to do that. Let's see. One of the things that I remember in Kenya is the people there were really, really poor, and one of the things that they did is carve. They make carvings of elephants and animals and of all kinds of things and sell them. And if the really good stuff was made out of ebony, and if it wasn't quite as good, and maybe it was rosewood or different kinds of wood, but you could buy carvings, and we were able to do that. When Marie, she wanted to buy a dress or something, and she was in the capital, Kitale, and that's where Kim and Marcy they were at on their mission, and she was buying that, and I saw a woman in the store, and she was really, really a nice looking, attractive woman, but I could see that she had a big scar on her neck. Somebody tried to cut her throat, I guess. But they'd had a lot of different tribal wars and uprisings and stuff. I saw a little girl that had a big scar on her, had a scar on her face, one place too. But it just amazing the things that we saw and did there, and go ahead, Trevor, and tell us what you want to tell us.
You remember that so well, Jim. I didn't remember any of the names or the order. I didn't remember about us being rerouted around. Here, could you? Sorry, my husband's still in meeting, so I've got all the kids with me. We'll see if he'll be quiet. I remember we actually stayed 2 days extra, didn't we, Jim? We were scheduled to go down back to Madagascar to meet the president with Doug and Audrey, but we wouldn't get to hike up Mount Kilimanjaro, so we voted to stay in Kenya just a little bit longer so we could actually hike up part of Kilimanjaro. So,
yeah.
so we could say we climbed Kilimanjaro, even though we didn't get the top.
Right.
We climbed it. So, but because it was such a central part, like we were in the savannas surrounding this gorgeous mountain, and you could see it from so many aspects of where we're at, that it was just so compelling to go up and be able to set foot on it. I had kids in my ear, but they wanted us to pay $50. We went up to where the road was, and they wanted us to pay $50 to be able to go get on Kilimanjaro. And we said, heck no, we're not paying $50 each to walk up there. So we went a back road and then just kind of bushwhacked our way up as far as we could, a couple miles. And it was satisfying enough for us that we were pretty proud we didn't have to pay money. Yeah, I can't think of, I will say that, Jim, I thought it was funny that it was, they had a strong accent, and it was hard for Jim to understand them. So he would have me translate what they'd say, even though they were talking in English. It was a strong African accent. So he'd ask me, "What did she just say?" So that's a part I remember a lot. I would just kind of chuckle because it was a really, even though they spoke English, it was that thick accent. And Jim won't tell you, but he was looking out. Maybe he would take a Maasai woman home with him. He was keeping his eyes peeled for a good-looking one. But I guess it didn't happen. Darn it.
Didn't Jim try to arrange a few marriages for him while you were
Oh,
there?
yes. Yes. We'd be driving in Nairobi down the street and stop at a red light, and there'd be a girl on the side. Kim had said, "Here's my uncle. He needs a wife to go with him to America. Can you go?" And the girl would say, "Yes, I can go."
They practically climb in. They were ready to climb in with us. So America, yes.
And he asked another, and she said, "Yes, I can do it if I can get a passport." Oh boy, crazy.
Yeah.
One thing that we had a chance to do is meet several of the people that Kim and Marcy knew in the different branches, and we went with them to teach a couple of discussions. One time we went to teach this woman, her name was Beatrice, and she was a member of the church. And her kids, quite a few of them were not members because they'd been off at a boarding school so they could get an education. And she lived out in the bush. And anyway, so her kids were there, some of them, and we went and taught them a discussion. And while we were there, why, she fed us. And it was very interesting. There's her house was, they take just kind of they frame it with just some poles, real light poles, and tie it, and then they pack it in with mud and put cow manure. I think the mud and cow manure mixed together, and then they rub cow manure on the walls, and it's a dirt floor. While we were teaching the discussion, chickens had come in on the floor, but she fed us. And the food that she gave us, it was ugali, and it was like cooked corn, but it looked just like oatmeal mush, the color and texture. But she didn't give us a bowl and any utensils to eat it. She'd bring a wash tub around, and we'd wash her hands, and she'd pour water out of a pan, warm water, and we'd wash her hands. And then she'd give us the food, and we'd eat it with our hands. And it was this cornmeal, or this corn stuff that looked like oatmeal, and cooked cabbage, and it was really good. Boy, I thought that was great that she fed us, and to be able to experience that, because she didn't act like she was embarrassed. It was just genuine, and she was just really good. And I remember that woman had about 11 or 12 kids, and she was built just like a 16-year-old girl would be. She wasn't fat, didn't have an ounce of fat on her, and she was just really nice. Her husband had died just a short time before, but that was a great experience, going there and eating there in her house after we taught her and her kids. When we first got to Kitale that night, Kim, I can't remember if Marie was with us, but he took us over to the president of a branch, and that was Martin Dungu, and they had candles. They didn't have electricity in their apartment. There was him and his wife, and they had a whole bunch of kids, and those kids would just sit and watch and never say a word, never make a fuss. They weren't running all over crazy and tearing the place up and yelling and screaming. They just sat quiet and watched everything and listened to everything that was done and said. It was so impressive. And that was just a little kind of a hot house that they lived in with dirt floors. But he was the branch president, a really good guy. And Kim had talked to him after that, and he said, "Is your uncle married?" And yeah, and Kim would say no, and he said, "Well, I've got a sister that's really, really good. You can marry her," and he can marry her. And then a year or two later, he asked, "Is your uncle married?" And Kim said no, and he said, "Well, you can have my oldest daughter." When I was there, she was about 14 or 16, but the people were very fascinating to talk to and communicate with, and we had a chance to teach some other families. I remember one time we were walking down this trail to go meet with some people, and this little black kid was coming down the trail, and he saw us and stopped, and his eyes got as big as just, he was just petrified. And as soon as he come to his senses, he took off running just as fast as he could run. When I could see how fast he could run, I wanted to catch him and bring him over and recruit him to play football for BYU, but I couldn't run fast enough to catch him. But we sure had a lot of really, really interesting experiences, and I don't know how anywhere in the world that you could go that would be as fun a trip and as interesting. And our hosts were just incredible, and Marie was great to travel with and do anything with. It was just a lot of fun. So I'll give you some time now, Marie.
I was thinking the same thing. I think I took for granted at the time the amount of work that Kim and Marcy and Doug and Audrey put into driving us around, getting us accommodations, booking some hotels and tours, and I think I was just kind of oblivious, and it like Jim says, it was one of the most amazing trips I've ever been on, and partly because of the people I was with. I couldn't have picked a better travel mate than Jim. He was the most, I've never been treated so well. He's the biggest gentleman and most polite and so easy to travel with. It was really, really enjoyable. Trying to, I don't know that I have much more to add about Kenya, but we did go back to Madagascar and we spent Christmas there. So we kind of, Kenya was smushed in between, but Jim already talked about getting that lady cutting the Christmas tree down by herself. She was amazing. And he failed to mention that when we went on the beach in Madagascar, he got a massage. Remember that, Jim?
I do. That was one of the best massages I've ever had.
She wanted to go to the hotel room and give a massage on his bed, but he kept on saying, no, it's fine. We'll just do it out here on the sand, out here in safer. I think I got the massage first, maybe, and then Jim consented. Right? And they braided my hair in these, like, what are they called? I don't know. The multiple braids, with beads on the end. Yeah. But that was a really, I remember that Christmas. It was so different than any Christmas I spent before or since, because it was just in humble circumstances, and you saw the conditions of the people around you, and you were just so grateful that Doug and Audrey had a real toilet and not a hole in the ground like everyone else was using. Even at the church house, the restrooms were a hole in the ground. And that was the year that President Hinckley challenged us to read the Book of Mormon by the end of the year. So I was finishing my Book of Mormon reading, and it was, I'll always remember how strong my testimony grew and the circumstances I was in, because it was just made you so grateful for God's creatures and for the circumstances, how blessed we are to live in America. So memorable.
Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask us?
It sure has been interesting, both of you. It's been really, really fun. Someone asked if we could get Kim and Marcy to report their mission. I will try and contact them. So a week from today, we won't have this.
Were so sweet and so good, and the mangoes were so good. Doug, just outside of his house, had a great big tree, just loaded with avocados. In Nairobi, we went to this place and had milkshakes, and they were banana mango milkshakes, and that was, I can't think of anything that I've ever eaten in my life that was as good as that. The ice cream was really good, and then those fresh sweet bananas and mangoes in it. It was just so good. But the trip was just incredible. Just incredible.